Elias Morin was not a soldier, not a hero, and not someone history would remember easily. He was a human systems technician, sent far from Earth to a quiet alien station called Kethra Haven. The station floated near a dying star, built as a refuge for species that had lost their worlds to war. Elias came to fix broken lights, failing heat lines, and old life support systems that no one else wanted to touch. He liked quiet work. Machines made sense, people did not. That was why he noticed her. Her name was Valera. She was from the Keth species, tall, pale silver skin, eyes shaped like stretched stars glowing softly in the dark. She walked slowly, always alone, always wearing the dark mourning wrap of her people. Elias learned from the station logs that her mate had died 6 cycles earlier, crushed while holding a blast door shut during an evacuation. He saved 300 lives. He did not save himself. Elias never spoke to Valera at first. He only saw her sitting near the observation window, staring at the stars as if waiting for one of them to answer. Other Keth avoided her. Among her kind, grief was private. To interrupt it was considered disrespectful. Humans were different. They noticed absence. They felt silence like pressure on the chest. One night, the station's artificial lights failed in her sector. Emergency alerts flashed red across Elias' wrist console. He sighed, grabbed his toolkit, and followed the blinking path through narrow corridors. The station felt colder than usual. Even the hum of the engines sounded tired. When he reached Valera's quarters, the door was open. That was unusual. Station rules required all personal rooms to stay sealed during night cycles. Elias hesitated. Entering without permission could be seen as a violation. He stood there for several seconds, listening. No sound. He stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the weak glow of the stars outside the curved window. Valera lay on her resting platform, unmoving. Her mourning wrap was loosened, not in disorder but in surrender. All 4 of her eyes were open. They were fixed on him. Elias froze. He expected anger, fear, a command to leave. Instead, her eyes softened. Not with desire. Not with hunger. With something deeper. Loneliness. Her gaze did not pull him forward. It invited him. It was the look of someone who had carried pain too long and finally saw another living soul. Elias swallowed hard. His heart beat fast, not from attraction, but from understanding. Humans recognized that look. It was the same look people had after funerals, after hospitals, after wars that ended but never really stopped. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "The lights went out." Valera did not answer with words. Her species did not waste speech during grief. She moved one hand slightly, resting it on the empty space beside her. The platform was large, made for 2. Elias stayed where he was. He knew crossing that distance meant changing something forever. "I won't touch," he said, voice shaking. "I can just sit if you want." Her eyes dimmed briefly, then brightened again. That was Keth for acceptance. He sat on the floor beside the platform, back against the cool metal frame. The station shuddered as emergency power came online. Dim lights flickered back to life. Valera's breathing slowed. Minutes passed, then longer. For the first time since her mate's death, she was not alone with her memories. For the first time since leaving Earth, Elias felt like he mattered more than his job. Outside the window, the dying star burned quietly. Inside the room, something fragile began to heal. Elias did not leave when the lights returned. He stayed seated on the floor, careful not to move too suddenly, as if sound itself might break something fragile. Valera remained still on the resting platform, her 4 eyes half open now, their glow softer than before. The heavy silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was full, like a room where something important had just been said without words. On Kethra Haven, grief was meant to be endured alone. Valera had followed that rule for 6 long cycles. She had eaten alone, walked alone, and slept in a space built for two. Her people believed mourning purified the soul, but isolation had only hollowed her. She turned her head slightly toward Elias. "You did not leave," she said at last. Her voice was low and careful, like someone touching an old wound. "I didn't think you wanted me to," Elias replied. Her eyes shifted color, faint ripples of light moving across them. Among the Keth, that meant confusion mixed with relief. "My kind believes pain must be faced without witness," she said. "If others see it, it becomes weakness." Elias looked at the floor, then back at her. "On Earth," he said, "we think pain grows stronger when no one sees it." Valera considered this. She lifted herself slightly, resting on one elbow. The movement was slow, as if her body was not fully used to choice anymore. "Then why did you sit on the floor?" she asked. "Why not beside me?" Elias smiled, small and unsure. "Because sitting beside someone means something different for humans. I didn't want to assume." For a long moment, Valera watched him. Then she shifted again, moving closer to the edge of the platform. The empty space beside her remained open. "Sit," she said. This time, Elias did. The platform was warm, not physically but in a way that made his chest feel lighter. He sat upright, hands resting on his knees, giving her space. Valera lay back again, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. The faint hum of the station filled the room. "My mate was named Corel," she said suddenly. Elias did not interrupt. "He laughed too loudly," she continued. "He believed stars listened when spoken to. When the hull breached, he sealed the door with his body. He did not call my name. He did not say goodbye." Her voice trembled just once. Elias felt his throat tighten. "Maybe he didn't want his last sound to be fear," he said softly. Valera turned her head toward him. Her eyes shone brighter. "No one has said that to me," she whispered. Outside the window, transport lights drifted past like distant fireflies. Life continued, careless and steady. Valera's hand moved closer to Elias, not touching, just near enough to feel warmth. Her fingers shook. "Does your species fear touching grief?" she asked. Elias shook his head. "We fear not touching it." Slowly, carefully, Valera placed her hand over his. Her skin was cool, smooth like stone warmed by sun. Elias did not pull away. Her breathing changed, deeper, uneven at first, then steady. "I am tired of being strong," she said. Elias squeezed her hand once, not tight, just enough to say, "I hear you." They stayed like that for a long time. No promises, no labels, just two beings sharing the weight of loss. When Elias finally stood to leave, Valera did not look away. "Will you return?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. For the first time in many cycles, Valera slept without dreams of closing doors. And for the first time since arriving on Kethra Haven, Elias walked away feeling like he had repaired something far more important than broken lights. The following cycle on Kethra Haven brought tension thicker than the station's recycled air. Whispers had begun to spread, subtle but sharp, cutting through corridors like hidden blades. Some humans admired Elias for his patience, his quiet way of connecting with Valera. Others questioned it, suspicious of his closeness to a widowed alien. Among the Keth, rumors were heavier. Some elders muttered warnings, their eyes flashing suspicion. To sit beside a grieving widow, even to comfort, was not always considered honorable. Elias noticed the change immediately. Doors that once opened freely now closed as he passed. Conversations halted when he approached. He felt the weight of eyes on him, both human and alien, curious and judgmental. He tried to focus on his repairs, but Valera's presence haunted him. Each time he glanced toward her quarters, he worried about how the whispers had reached her. Would she retreat further into herself? Would the trust they were building collapse under the pressure? One night, alarms rang throughout the station. Red lights flashed across the hallways, and a low hum of tension vibrated the metal floors. Elias ran toward Valera's sector, heart pounding not just from fear but anticipation. Raiders, unknown and heavily armed, had breached the outer docking bay. Reports indicated their target was not humans alone, but anyone vulnerable, anyone unable to fight. When Elias reached her quarters, he found the door slightly ajar. He entered cautiously. The room was empty. His pulse quickened, a cold twist in his stomach. And then he heard it, a soft metallic scraping, a hiss of a blade sliding from its sheath. Valera emerged from the shadows. Her mourning robe had been set aside, revealing the ceremonial blade of her species, ornate and deadly. Her 4 eyes shone with determination, brighter than he had ever seen. "They will take the young if we do nothing," she said, her voice steady and dangerous. Elias froze for a moment, overwhelmed by the intensity. Humans trained for emergencies, but nothing prepared them for someone they cared about standing between life and death with such raw courage. He could see her grief transformed into action, a force of will that demanded respect. "I'll help," he said, swallowing fear. "We can do this together." She nodded once, a small flicker of trust in her eyes. Together, they barricaded the room's entrance, rerouting power lines to activate the station's emergency systems. Smoke and fire alarms screamed, flashing crimson across the walls. The raiders attempted to force the doors, but the station's automated defenses, combined with Valera's precise movements and Elia's quick thinking, created a deadly puzzle for the intruders. They worked seamlessly, moving as one, human ingenuity and alien precision. The raiders slipped on frozen corridors, miscalculated traps, and eventually retreated. Silence fell again, heavy but not suffocating. Valera lowered her blade, breathing heavily. "You risked yourself," she said, voice catching slightly, though her eyes betrayed relief. "I didn't hesitate," Elias replied, his voice calm but his hands shaking. "Not for anyone else." The elder who had doubted him appeared then, quiet and observing. No words were spoken, but the look in the elder's eyes said it all. Respect had been earned through action, not tradition. That night the station hummed quietly, the emergency lights dimmed, and Valera offered Elias a place beside her on the platform. Not as a replacement, not as a lover, but as a witness. A promise that, even in a galaxy full of danger and grief, some bonds could be stronger than fear. Elias sat beside her, heart steadying, knowing that trust, once earned through silence and courage, could withstand even the shadows of fear. And in that quiet room with the stars watching through reinforced windows, 2 beings learned that grief could still coexist with hope. The station's alarms had faded, but the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. Kethra Haven had survived another threat, but the scars, both in the corridors and in the hearts of its inhabitants, remained. Elias and Valera returned to her quarters in silence, each step heavy with the memory of danger, yet lighter with the knowledge that they had protected each other. Valera sank onto the platform, her ceremonial robe draped loosely across her shoulders. Her 4 eyes flickered softly, reflecting the faint glow from the observation window. Elias placed himself on the floor beside her, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that his presence could be felt. For the first time in many cycles, they both breathed without urgency. "You fought well," Valera said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Strangers do not often risk themselves for another's grief." Elias looked at her, chest tight. "Humans, we do strange things sometimes, but some things are worth it, some people are worth it." Valera's eyes softened. She lifted a hand, placing it gently on his arm. Her touch was light, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight of unspoken gratitude. "Your kind sees strength differently," she murmured. "We think strength is alone. You show me that strength can exist in togetherness." Elias smiled faintly. "I think we all need someone to lean on, even when we are supposed to be strong." They sat like that for hours, words unnecessary, letting the quiet fill the space between them. Outside the window, the stars spun slowly, indifferent yet constant, a silent audience to the fragile connection forming inside the station. Over the next few cycles, a subtle change occurred. Velira began to move more freely, her steps lighter, her gestures less constrained by the weight of mourning. She still carried her grief, but it no longer defined every motion. She allowed herself moments of small laughter, fleeting smiles, and occasionally conversations with Elias about mundane things, ship maintenance, star charts, and Earth customs. The Human Council, once uneasy about Elias' closeness with a widowed alien, began to notice. Instead of whispers of suspicion, there were nods of quiet approval. Humans and Keth alike began to understand that grief shared was not a weakness, it was a bridge. One evening, the station announced a minor system failure in the habitat sector. While running diagnostics, Elias found Velira leaning against a railing, gazing at the stars with her usual quiet intensity. She spoke without looking at him. "Do you think the stars listen?" she asked. Elias paused, considering. "Sometimes I think they do. Sometimes they wait for us to speak, just to hear the courage it takes." Velira's lips curved in a faint smile. "I have spoken too much to them, yet never like this. You remind me that someone can listen even when the stars cannot." Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Then let me listen," he said softly. Later, when the station lights dimmed for the night cycle, Velira invited him to sit on the platform beside her. This time, he did not hesitate. Her eyes held no request, no command, just quiet acceptance, a trust that had been earned through courage, patience, and shared silence. They rested together, side by side, letting the vast emptiness of space outside the reinforced glass remind them that even in a universe of endless stars, connections between beings could make the coldest places feel like home. And for the first time, Elias realized that being human was not about conquering galaxies or surviving danger. It was about showing up. It was about staying. It was about being present for someone who had lost everything, and in doing so, discovering that even the heaviest grief could be lightened by quiet courage and shared presence. Word of the raid and Elias' bravery spread quickly through Kethra Haven. At first, whispers of suspicion still lingered. Humans were outsiders, unpredictable and fragile in ways the Keth didn't understand. But those whispers soon turned into quiet admiration. Stories circulated of the human who had not only saved lives but had stayed by the side of a grieving widow, showing courage, patience, and respect. Velira noticed the change, though she did not comment at first. She still carried her grief, but it no longer dominated her every thought. She observed other humans interacting with the Keth differently, more gently, more intentionally. Small acts mattered, doors held open longer, repairs done without complaint, presence felt, not just seen. Humans seemed to understand what it meant to bear the weight of loss without ignoring it. One day, a group of young Keth approached Elias while he was fixing a life support unit. They watched him carefully, eyes wide with curiosity. "How do you endure grief differently?" one asked, a soft voice trembling with both wonder and doubt. Elias looked up from his tools, surprised. The question was simple, yet heavy with meaning. "We sit with it," he said slowly. "We don't hide from it. We let ourselves feel it and we let others be there too. That's how we survive." Velira stood nearby, observing. She realized that his words, though simple, carried something powerful. Humans did not need ceremonies or rituals to honor grief. They only needed presence, attention, and courage. In that moment, she understood that Elias had given her something far greater than comfort. He had given her hope. The elders began to take notice. At first, they were hesitant. They watched Elias with a careful gaze, nodding the quiet respect he showed Velira and the other Keth. They saw that he did not mock traditions, nor did he attempt to replace the departed. He simply honored the living, offering patience and strength without expectation. Slowly, the elders' skepticism shifted to acknowledgement. Outside the station, the galaxy continued its indifferent spin, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place inside a single corridor. Humans did not dominate through force, nor did they bend others to their will. They persisted through empathy, connection, and determination. These qualities began to ripple outward. Refugees from other worlds sought human companionship, not for protection or power, but for guidance in learning how to endure. Valera found herself smiling more often, her movements lighter, her eyes brighter. The platform where she had mourned for cycles became a space of conversation, quiet laughter and shared silence. Elias sat beside her regularly, but not as a replacement, not as a hero, simply as a human willing to be present. One evening, after a long day of repairs and observation, Valera turned to him, her four eyes reflecting the soft light of the distant stars. "You're kind. You carry hope even when it is heavy. You remind me that we are not alone, even when we feel lost." Elias felt a lump in his throat. "We survive together," he said. "We endure together. That's what makes us human." And in the quiet moments that followed, Valera realized the truth. It was not superpowers, weapons, or technology that would shape the galaxy. It was simple courage. The courage to stay. The courage to care. The courage to honor loss without letting it destroy what remained. For the first time in many cycles, Valera's heart felt lighter, not because she had forgotten Coral, but because she understood that grief could be shared, honored, and survived. And through this understanding, humanity, not as conquerors but as companions, was quietly changing the galaxy, one life, one active presence at a time. Cycles passed, and Haven hummed with life. The station no longer felt like a refuge for the broken, but a place where healing could grow. Valera had begun to walk among the Keth with renewed confidence. Her mourning robe hung loosely, a reminder of the past, but it no longer defined her every movement. She laughed quietly at jokes from young Keth apprentices and even shared small meals in the common hall without hesitation. Elias watched her from across corridors, quietly proud of her strength, though he felt a tightening in his chest every time he imagined leaving. The day arrived when Elias' contract officially ended. His replacement team had landed, and the station needed him no longer. The corridors that once felt familiar now felt like a countdown ticking in metallic echoes. He packed his tools carefully, each item a small ritual to mark the end of his time on Kethra Haven. He did not want to leave, but duty called, and humans rarely linger without orders. Valera approached him in her quarters just before departure. She stood silently by the observation window, the twin suns reflecting softly in her four eyes. The quiet between them was heavy with unspoken words. Elias placed his bag gently on the floor, hesitant to break the fragile moment. "My mate is honored," Valera began, her voice calm but filled with meaning. "My grief has shaped me, yet it no longer confines me. You have reminded me that life continues, even when loss is infinite." Elias nodded, swallowing hard. "You've survived with more courage than most can imagine. I only stayed." Her gaze softened, a shimmer of gratitude glimmering in her eyes. She took a step closer, hesitating as though testing the space between them. "And yet, your presence has been more powerful than any tradition, any ritual. I feel something new, though I do not know what it is." Elias reached out slowly. His hand hovered near hers, careful not to assume, careful not to overstep. "You don't need to know, you just need to feel it." Valera allowed her fingers to brush against his, a light, almost imperceptible contact. It was enough. It said everything: trust, hope, and the acknowledgement that grief could coexist with life. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "My future is open," she said, voice small but firm. Elias returned her smile, the warmth in his chest spreading. "Then we will see where it leads." They stood together near the window, watching the twin suns dip toward the horizon of a distant planet. Valera did not ask him to stay. He did not insist. They both understood that connection was not about chains or obligations. It was about choice, respect, and presence. When Elias finally left the quarters, Valera returned to the platform, her fingers lingering in the empty space where he had sat. For the first time in many cycles, she felt not abandonment but anticipation. Life had returned its rhythm, and for the first time she could look toward the future without fear. As Elias walked through the station's corridors toward his shuttle, he felt a quiet pride. He had not saved the galaxy. He had not conquered enemies. But he had shown that humanity's greatest strength was in connection, in courage, in staying when it mattered most. And in that moment, both human and alien understood something profound. To be human was not to dominate, but to choose to endure beside another, to honor life while honoring loss. And sometimes, that choice was all it took to change worlds. Outside, the stars awaited silently. But now, they shone on a galaxy where courage and compassion were beginning to ripple, quiet but unstoppable years later. Historians would write of the small events that reshaped Kethra Haven. They would describe a human technician who had quietly defied expectations, who had sat beside a grieving alien widow and refused to leave her alone. They would note that humans did not always fight with weapons or command fleets, but sometimes they changed the course of civilizations simply by being present. Elias had returned to Earth, yet he often thought of Valera. He remembered her four glowing eyes watching him as he repaired systems, the light in them softening when he offered quiet reassurance. He remembered her voice, calm but steady, teaching him patience in ways he had never learned in any classroom or training deck. And he remembered the day he left Kethra Haven, her fingers brushing his one last time, a silent promise that they would meet again, not because it was demanded, but because it was chosen. Back on the station, Valera carried on with her life. Her grief had not vanished. Grief never truly disappears, but she had learned to move beside it rather than be crushed by it. She spoke to the young Keth, sharing the lessons she had learned from the human who stayed. Presence mattered, courage mattered, and empathy could change worlds. The other aliens began to see humans differently, not as fragile outsiders, but as beings capable of endurance that went beyond physical strength. The colony elders, once skeptical of Elias, now shared tales of his quiet bravery. He had saved lives during the raid, yes, but more than that, he had given something intangible, proof that grief could be met with compassion, that loss did not have to isolate, and that even a single human could shift the way an entire culture viewed strength. Valera often returned to the observation window, gazing at the distant stars. Some evenings, she thought she saw a small human shuttle among the swirls of cosmic light, carrying its passenger across countless light years. In her heart, she felt Elias' presence there, not as a memory alone, but as a continuing connection, reminding her that trust, patience, and courage could transcend space itself. One night, as twin suns dipped below the horizon of a distant planet, Valera placed her hand on the platform beside her, empty yet full of meaning. She whispered softly to the stars, "We endure, we carry hope, we stay." Her words were not for the stars, not for humans, but for herself and for anyone who would come after, seeking a path through grief. Elias, far across the galaxy, sat quietly in his own small quarters, thinking of Valera. He realized that his greatest victories were never on battlefields or in the halls of power. They were in quiet rooms, beside those who had lost everything, in moments where he chose to remain present, to witness grief, and to offer courage without demand. The galaxy continued its endless spin. Wars raged, stars died, planets fell silent, but somewhere in the void, humans endured in ways that mattered most, through patience, connection, and compassion. Elias had answered a silent call, not of fame, not of duty, but of choice. And by answering it, he had shown that being human was more than survival. It was the ability to transform sorrow into strength, to create bonds that even time and space could not sever. And Valera, the alien widow he had once sat beside, smiled quietly as she watched the distant stars. In her eyes burned the knowledge of what humans could be, beings capable of courage, compassion, and the quiet heroism of simply staying. In the end, the universe learned a lesson that no fleet or weapon could teach, that humanity's true power lay not in domination, but in presence, in endurance, and in the courage to stand beside another, even when the stars themselves seemed indifferent. And the stars, as always, watched silently, leaning closer to witness it all.